We work so hard to get to the promised land, and then we get there and we're gravely disappointed. And that leads to an existential crisis for many of us.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome to the channel if you're new here. I'm so delighted to have with us today Dr. Dimitrios Tsatiris. He's a psychiatrist, an author, a speaker. He's got a book coming out that I've just heard about. But before we dive into that, I want him to share a little bit more about him. And I have been following him forever because I feel like all of his social media posts and his TEDx talk were speaking straight to my face. So he's often helping high achievers with anxiety, and there's so much that we can unpack with that. So I'd love to talk about that. But before we do, Demetrius, welcome to the channel.
Jillian, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm truly honored and grateful to be here. And hey, the following is mutual. I follow your work as well, and there's a lot of stuff that you post about that resonates with me as well. So I was pretty excited about our conversation today.
Yeah, well, likewise. And I just had the delight of hearing a little bit more about your story and what brought you to where you are at today. And I invite you again. I do this to a lot of people, so I apologize, but if we can share a little bit more about that with the audience, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, totally. No need to apologize. So I was born in the States, but I grew up in Greece. I spent my childhood there on an island called Chios in the Aegean. And I came back to the US at 16 with a second grade level of English speaking. I remember one of my first conversations in the US in class, somebody asked me what's up, and I literally looked up in the ceiling confused and perplexed. I thought they were trying to pull a joke on me. But anyways, I've come a long way since then, and I had a life-altering event when I was a freshman in college. I lost a dear cousin of mine to an medical error, and that's when I decided to become a physician. Figured out that what, mental health is what I enjoy the most: talking to people and hearing about their stories, their life stories, and trying to pick up patterns in their life stories and provide them with tools to navigate their lives. That to me is more rewarding than you know stabilizing somebody's hemoglobin A1C, though that's important. That's important work. I want to be clear about that. So that's when I decided to pursue psychiatry. And a big passion of mine is working with physicians. That's about half my practice: physicians and achievers, because, we work so hard to get to the promised land, and then we get there and we're gravely disappointed. And that leads to an existential crisis for many of us, right? To work so hard, to take on six figures of debt, to climb the mountain, and then to figure out that this isn't what I thought it was going to be. So that's kind of my life journey leading to this point.
And thank you for sharing that. It's so fascinating too to hear you say that half of your practice is physicians, because when I got help the first time, it was so hush hush and no one talked about it and the stigma. So how can we normalize people getting help?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a multifactorial approach. One is that we have to accept that um, physicians, we suffer at higher rates of mental health difficulties in the general population. And that's for a number of reasons. Even if medicine was practiced in an ideal setting, practicing medicine is hard. People come to you with problems, session after session, day after day, week after week. And we're in the front lines of human suffering. We're in the front lines of trauma. We're exposed to traumatic experiences. And you can only endure so much exposure before it eventually takes a toll. But that's, again, medicine in ideal settings. Now, you add the systemic problems that are occurring in medicine that are very well documented, right? Administrative requirements, documentation requirements, being double booked. I can go on and on. And practicing medicine becomes insurmountable. And then you add on top of that life. People deal with like relationship problems, loss, health problems, right? Stresses of the day to day living. So it makes sense that as physicians, as healers, we suffer at greater rates than the general population. And what we need to do is talk about it, admit that, like, we're human, that in many aspects we're no different than our patients. And just like we treat our patients, we also need help when it comes to our mental health difficulties. Of course, systemic things have to happen as well to make sure that we overcome the stigma against mental health amongst the physicians. For example, state medical boards need to stop asking physicians questions about their mental health histories, right? Which only perpetuates the stigma. Hospitals, they need to invest in physician wellness. They need to realize that when they prioritize the health of their physicians, that actually benefits them because you have healthier, happier, more productive physicians, right? So it's actually not at a cost. It
Mhm.
actually comes at a benefit to the hospital and the physicians and ultimately the patients. So I think it's a multifactorial approach where we need the system to promote physician wellness, but also as physicians, we need to be able to speak about the struggle of practicing medicine.
You said so many wonderful things there that are really illuminating. I think the dehumanization of physicians is really contributing to this moral injury, the trauma, the existential crisis, just this burden, and not normalizing seeking help. You were mentioning about hearing about people's trauma and having the vicarious trauma, and then shoving it in, and being told like, don't process it, like it's better for you to keep shoving it in. Can you share like what happens when we continue to just keep holding it
Oh
in?
yeah. Oh yeah. And it's part of the culture of medicine. Medicine selects for certain traits, stoicism, being self-reliant, self-sacrifice, right? So perfectionism. So medicine selects and reinforces these traits. So then we become, residents or attendings. And then what happens is we're exposed to traumatic experiences, either either hearing our patients' stories, like vicarious traumatization, or actually like being in the front lines of like seeing a motor vehicle accident, seeing a gunshot wound, seeing some gruesome injuries, seeing people die, right? And then what we do many times is we suppress because we got to move on to the next case. And we do that over and over. And that suppression, it takes a huge toll on our mental health. So studies do show that when you suppress, it has negative effects because one, there's a cognitive load. So, you're trying not to think about something, but how can you not think about it, right? When you're suppressing it. But number two, there's also the thought and the feeling associated with that experience, it increases. It's like a volcano that's like brewing and brewing, and it's only a matter of time before that volcano explodes. You can only shove so much, suppress so much in a closet before that closet gets overfilled, and then it just becomes a mess, right? So suppression does not work in the long term. It's not a healthy long-term coping strategy. And what is healthier is the ability to identify our feelings about an experience and to be able to express them in a safe, healthy environment.
Expressing them in a safe, healthy environment, what could that look like?
My goodness, it can look like a number of ways. One could be like having process groups, right, where physicians come together to talk about their experiences, and maybe talking to a colleague. Hey, so and so, I had a really rough case. Can we talk about it at some point? It can be talking to like a therapist, right? So it can take on a number of different forms.
Yeah, you said some things about even the stoicism. I champion myself on being able to manage my emotions and to tuck them in to the point where I was in therapy, and the therapist said, I never know what you're feeling. And I didn't realize that I wasn't articulating them because I was feeling them so tremendously that I thought it was obvious. And I have just now been introduced to the concept of being over controlled in terms of
Mhm.
like in the United States, it seems like many of us have this linear vision of more is better when it comes to managing our emotions and like this linear path, but it's more like a bell curve that when you get to over controlled, it can actually be detrimental. But there's some aspects of that that are really glorified, especially in medicine.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So I'm gonna go all ancient Greek here on you, and so Aristotle talks about how virtue is found in moderation, in the middle ground. He talks about to have courage is a virtue that we look um, upon favorably. The absence of courage is to be a coward, to have no courage, and that's not good. But the other end of the extreme is to be reckless, to have so much courage that you don't assess risk and you're just going for it every single time. So tying it back to what you discussed there as far as stoicism and the control of emotions, The roots of Stoicism is in ancient Greece, where the father of Stoicism, Zeno of Citium, he said that the ideal agent has no emotions. So according to the founders of Stoicism, the ideal person, the ideal agent has no emotions because, quote, emotions are irrational, according to the early Stoics. That's the foundation of Stoicism. Um, Now, I understand that Stoicism has evolved throughout the years and that it's had a renaissance in the modern self help community. And I think there's a lot of valuable teachings within Stoicism, such as focusing on our sphere of control, um, taking rational approaches to things. But we also have to integrate Stoicism with emotional awareness, emotional intelligence, emotional mastery, right? So let me give an example. Imagine you go to a therapist and you
Mhm.
go to the therapist with a problem. Like, I'm going through a loss, I'm going through a divorce, I'm going through like a stressor at work. And they're like, I hear what you're saying. Let's approach this stoically.
Yep. I've
How
had
far
that
is that
happen.
therapy going to go? It's not going to go
Yeah.
anywhere,
hmm
right? So Stoicism does have some valid, sound principles,
hmm
but it has to be integrated with an acknowledgement of one's emotions, an expression of those emotions, and a processing of those emotions. Because as human beings, we have a need to be seen, heard, and understood. So when you deny your emotions, you're denying those emotional needs that you have. You're denying yourself the ability to be seen, heard, and understood by yourself and those around you.
I I even when you were playing that therapist for that second, I felt the emotional disconnection of like, I don't feel connected. And that's kind of how I felt throughout my life when I was abandoning. I have a hard time feeling my emotions, naming my emotions, then communicating. And I can reflect that back to childhood, being a highly sensitive child. And then anytime I'd say I was anxious, it was like, don't say that, right? Like that's
Yeah,
unbecoming. Just, shove it in. And so I learned that it's better to not talk about my emotions. And what that has led to me to happen is, I love humans, but I struggle with the connection because I'm always like anxious that my emotions are going to be judged or shamed.
hmm
I think that's
yeah,
my psychological assessment of myself thus far about why it may hurt us very deeply if we're not able to express our
oh
emotions.
sure, yeah, that makes sense, right? The past impacts the present, right? So like if you as a kid were told to like, oh no, we don't talk about your anxiety, we don't talk about your emotions, everything's fine, hush hush, then it is not comfortable for you to express your emotions. And I'm there with you, right? So I grew up in Greece. I love my parents to death, but they had a different upbringing than I have had, right? And maybe they did not have the tools that I have today in my life to be able to have the emotional awareness that I have, right? So yeah, as a child as well, for me it was, just be stoic, be tough, work hard. We work hard, so we want you to work hard because we want you to change the family tree. My dad's a cook, my mom's a cashier at a grocery store, so we want you to have a better life than we have. And my parents said that you need to achieve in order to change the family tree, right? Um, but did I get much education growing up on emotional awareness, emotional expression? Probably not, and that's okay. I don't blame my parents at all. I love them to death, and they did the best that they could have with the set of circumstances that they were given, right?
Yeah, I always look back in marriage and family therapy, the program I'm in, we do like these
Yeah,
genograms or family diagrams where you look back and you understand the context of their environment when they were children. And so to come from a place of compassion, curiosity,
yeah,
and non-judgment, and also invite, right? They also need healing too, and whether or not they want to step into that or what they feel that they need. I do think, just like you said, it's a non-blaming thing. It's the humanity again shared between seeing our parents as also humans who also had an upbringing and
yeah.
also, had needs that weren't met in certain aspects of their life that impacted them in the way that they parented.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're absolutely true. The past impacts the present. It's important for us to have compassion for our parental figures because again, I think most people mean well, and I think people do the best they can with the tools that they have, the environments that they grew up in, right? So we have our past, you do, I do, and then we enter medicine. And then
Mhm.
medicine selects for traits, and then medicine reinforces those traits. Medicine turns up the volume to 100, be it perfectionism, be it stoicism, be it achievement, be it being conscientious, whatever these traits are that medicine reinforces. And then we get to the mountain, the top of it, and we have these traits, but they're double-edged swords. And again, stoicism is an example. It has some valuable meanings to it. There's some stoicism has a place in medicine, but as long as it's integrated with emotion, with healthy emotional processing. Otherwise, stoicism becomes silence, self-sacrifice, rejection of any emotion,
Mhm.
isolating, right? And that comes at a tremendous toll to us.
I resonate with that a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
You said perfectionism a few times. I used to wear perfectionism as this huge badge of honor. And anytime someone called me a perfectionist, I'm like, I would a little bit stand up, like, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
Okay, so what's the double-edged sword? So what's the sword here? What on two sides of the table? We've got
Well,
perfectionism, some positive aspects, and some how is it detrimental?
well, listen, perfectionism, it has a positive connotation in society. It means
Hmm.
that I'm hardworking, that I'm conscientious, that I'm detail oriented, that I'm going to go the extra mile, right? So when we're saying that we're perfectionists, we're conveying a number of attributes, right? But the problem with perfectionism is that it is an unrealistic expectation in society and in medicine. Like think about how the tools that we have in medicine, they're not perfect. Medications that I prescribe as a psychiatrist, they don't work 100% and they can have side effects. Um, I'm sure that's the case in other fields of medicine as well, right? So, how can we be perfect when the tools that we have to serve our patients are not perfect? That's the ultimate oxymoron, right?
Hmm.
So, we set the bar at unattainable and unsustainable levels. We expect to be perfect when we cannot be perfect from the sheer fact that the tools that we have are not perfect. I sure hope that medicine continues to evolve and provide more effective treatments for our patients, right? Um, and if we're perfect, that means that we have no further room for growth. And I think that's a very grandiose and narcissistic and a very dangerous approach to medicine. So perfectionism, because we set the bar so high, it comes with a host of mental health conditions. It is transdiagnostic: depression, anxiety, eating disorders, OCD, trauma. I can go on and on. Suicidal ideation. It is associated with all these mental health conditions because we set the bar so high that it is just impossible to achieve and impossible to sustain.
It's so fascinating. I don't need to show too far behind the curtain, but I will say all of these diagnoses has made it onto my chart in some form or fashion. And also just thinking about perfection and being the outward vision, right? It's that
Yeah,
perfectionism, Brene Brown's research, when she talks about perfectionism, it's really like we want people to think that we're perfect, and inside it can often be fueled by shame, which was true for me, is like this never enoughness feeling.
yeah,
And learning about like growth and like leaning into the growth journey. I think perfectionism to me, and I look back on all the things that I quit prematurely or I self-sabotaged or my performance was hindered, it was all because I was so focused on a perfect outcome that it actually like I'd start to shake when studying or I'd be averse to
sure.
studying and preparing. So had I let go of that hyperfixation on this perfect outcome, I could have really reduced my suffering in learning to enjoy the process of learning and probably performed better. Is that kind of what you perceive, or how do you?
Yeah, you nailed it. And there's different types of perfectionism. One is self prescribed perfectionism, where it's like you set the bar for yourself, right? One is socially prescribed, where you believe that the environment expects you to be perfect. I think that's very common in medicine, where if a doctor makes a mistake, they get sued, or if a resident makes a mistake, they get chewed from their chief resident or attending. And then there's other oriented perfectionism, where I project my perfectionism onto those around me. So one of the reasons that I work on my stuff, we all do, we're human, right? And I work on my perfectionism because I don't want to project that onto my children. My daughter's 8, my son is 6. They're the two people I love the most, them and my wife, of course. And because perfectionism is associated with suffering, I work on my stuff, on my perfectionism. I allowed myself to be imperfect so that my children can have that space for them. That's a huge motivator for me. So those are the 3 types of perfectionism. And just to be mindful of how I think many of us have more than one flavor, one type of perfectionism, especially in medicine as doctors.
And what are you and people that you often see, what are we most afraid of when it comes to letting go of some of that perfectionism?
Oh, I think it's to reveal who we truly are, to be authentic. It's scary to be authentic. It's scary to be vulnerable, like you say, like Dr. Brené Brown says. That is scary. It's terrifying because we're afraid of being judged for our imperfections. We judge ourselves for our imperfections, so we assume that other people will judge us for our imperfections. There's like a projection that happens, right? But the reality is that by accepting that we're imperfect and embracing our imperfections and sharing those with people around us, that's how we change the culture of medicine. And it actually leads to stronger, more authentic relationships. I think perfectionism, it's a wall, it's a barrier. You're not being seen, heard, and understood. People interact with a facade of who
Mm-hmm.
you are, the facade that you're projecting, right? But if you can show people who you are, again, gradually in safe environments, right? What it leads is to like deeper, more meaningful, and more authentic relationships. But that can only happen by abandoning the perfectionistic facade and showing people who we really are.
And it seems like not abandoning the perfectionistic facade is abandoning parts of your authentic self.
Could you repeat that?
So not you were saying it's important to abandon part of like the perfectionistic facade in order to be our authentic self. And the flip side of that is when we are maintaining the perfectionistic facade, we're abandoning parts of our authentic self.
You nailed it. You nailed it. Sorry, I had to hear that twice because it's the end of the day for me. So yeah, it was a long day in clinic. So yes, you nailed that perfectly because it's a facade.
Did I nail
And
it perfectly?
yes,
Is that the word we want to use now?
pun intended, right? Pun intended. But you're right, where it's a facade. We're not being real with ourselves and we're not being real with the people around us. And we're denying ourselves and we're denying other people the opportunity to get to know who we really are. And I think we put on facades to protect ourselves, but I think that facade actually comes more at it hurts us more than anything.
Mhm. And you were mentioning too about that practice of slowly coming out and being our authentic self in spaces where that's safe. I think that that aspect of what you shared is so important because there are times where people being their authentic self, it actually is not safe. And that could
Sure.
actually further put them into a place where then it reinforces that need to not be themselves. And when you were saying working on yourself and working on your perfectionism, what does that mean?
Yeah. So a couple of points there. One is that trust is not an all or nothing value. It's a process. Again, the brain likes all or nothing. Do I trust them? Yes or no. Um, but in reality, trust is on a gradient. I can trust somebody 10%. I can trust somebody else 30%. I can trust somebody else 90%, 100%, right? So it's like getting to know somebody is peeling an onion. I might be working with a patient in therapy for half a decade before they finally tell me who they really are,
Mm,
before they finally tell me this thing that they're ashamed of, right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's people that I've been working with for a decade. We've been meeting every couple of weeks and we've been doing therapy for a decade, right? So trust is a gradient. And you know what happens? You give somebody a little bit of peace from the outer layer, you see how they respond. And based on the response, they either earn more trust, they become more trustworthy, or you're like, you know what, I can't go down that road. I got to keep it at 5% here.
Yeah.
So that's how it works. As far as me, there's people that I work with. We meet every week and we process thoughts and feelings. It's a group of us that we get together where I work, and because when you meet somebody, when you work with somebody, it can elicit feelings in us, right? And it's important that I have an environment where I can express myself and process those feelings, just like it's important for me to do that for colleagues as well. So that's kind of the environment where I'm able to kind of work on myself emotionally. This is kind of what I'm doing right now at this stage of my career.
Mm. It really captures the whole live it to give it. You're practicing what you preach.
Well, otherwise, it's hypocrisy. If I tell somebody not to drink, but I'm drinking, then we
Uh-huh.
have it's hypocrisy. If I tell somebody to work out, but I don't know how to talk about workouts, it's hypocrisy. So you have to practice, I think, what you preach. Otherwise, people will see right through you. They'll
Mm-hmm.
sense it because you can't go deep with them. If
Mm-hmm.
I tell somebody the importance of physical activity for their mental health, but I don't work out 4 or 5 times a week, they can tell by how I talk about the subject matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I tell somebody not to drink, but I drink, that they can sense, people can sense when somebody's being authentic or not, right? So in order to go deep with somebody, you have to had walked a similar path with them. Otherwise, they'll read right through you in life. They really
Mm-hmm.
will.
And it's fascinating too, because often medicine creates circumstances where people aren't able to eat the foods that we are often recommending to patients, or do the
Oh yeah.
exercise, or go to their own medical appointments. As dentist, my first career was like, when's the last dental appointment you've had? Especially in the military, it's like making sure that you're taking care of yourself. And also the philosophy of we can only support people at the level of which we're willing to reach ourselves, such as that
Yeah.
shame. When you were saying, I only recently was able to identify a lot of my own internal thoughts that were driving my sense of never being enough were deeply rooted in toxic shame. And that feeling of sitting with that it felt like soul murder. It was like so physically uncomfortable, and I wanted to process that with my therapist. So the words in the beginning, usually we have this like banter, and like I really don't want to talk about anything deep. And then he asked me how I was doing. I'm like, usually fine, right? And he's always like, how are you really doing? And this time I said, I'm struggling. And I immediately shut down. I was like, what the hell just happened? And I realized, because I don't usually feel I'm able to say I'm struggling, because we're usually there to help people. And so then to admit that I actually came to my own therapy appointment and was seeking help, I my first reaction was shame, and I sat through that for a month and was like doing all these courses on shame and learning how to really use the somatic experience of shame to get yourself
Mm.
out of it, utilizing like the somatic experiencing. Was it by Peter Levine? I think talks.
I have to learn about him. Who is Dr. Levine? Peter Levine? I just don't know him.
Yeah, I think he does some. I hope I'm right on his name, but he does somatic experiencing about like, here's how your body is going to react to certain emotions such as shame. It's going to really close down. And so
Uh,
if a patient's closed down in the session and you're trying to talk to them, but they're like in shame, there's no amount of like load here
yeah.
that's going to help them. Like,
No.
in order to get out of that shame experience and to reopen up and get the prefrontal cortex online where they can actually start processing things, we need to get them out of that clamped down shame response and back into the open uh, presence, which in one of the videos he talks about the presence I'm having is like coming from an authentic pride, not like the pride you get from like egotistical, like,
Yeah.
superficial, but that I'm proud that I'm here being my authentic self right now. And then that can help you re-engage.
No, that's very cool. I appreciate the share. So, how does shame manifest physically for you? Like, I imagine, you know, any emotion, it can present in a number of ways physically. I wonder how shame presents for you physically.
I wanted to vomit. My heart felt
Mhm.
like deep pain.
Mm.
I looked down. I went so numb. And um, after that session, like I isolate a lot, and I just was really down. And then the thoughts get really dark. Like, really, that's where a lot of like,
Mm.
I don't deserve to be here thoughts come in. But it just really feels like just emotionally and energetically clamped down, closed, and then isolate.
Wow, wow. That's a pretty powerful and painful experience.
Yeah. Which is why
It's
it's hard
it's
to talk
amazing that
about.
you're no, it's amazing that you're working on it though with your therapist. And again, there's no medication for shame. Again, it goes back to like how powerful and essential therapy is, and therapy is medicine. Again, I have got no FDA approved medications for guilt or shame, and that's why we have to be working with a professional on these different experiences that we have, because they can impact our ability to even care for patients, right? It's like if a patient says something that is triggering, it triggers guilt, it triggers shame, it triggers
Mhm.
insecurities that we all have. You can see how that can impact your ability to serve that human being, right? So I think it should be essential for physicians to have some environment, some level of training as far as like the emotional aspect of their lives, because that ultimately impacts their health and their ability to care for patients.
Mhm. Yeah, and with my first specialty, I know some specialties are they really drive and they really leverage your shame-based identity in order to
Hmm.
like really beat you down. And so in surgery, that was true. It really brought out, I mean, I think that part of that the fact that it really pushed and targeted that shame aspect of my identity. It was so shame-based. I think that ultimately is what led to my spiral that ultimately led me to leave surgery because I didn't have enough development of a more positive self-perception to balance that shame-based belief that I didn't belong to be there. So therefore that narrative just
Mm.
ran rampant.
Yeah,
And
it
I
got
think,
louder. Got
yeah,
louder. You're right. That narrative that we have, and then like the voice gets louder, the voice gets meaner, the tone changes, the volume, the affect, the whole 9 yards, right?
yes, and it goes back to what you were mentioning earlier when we're authentic self to have that safe environment. Because what I learned about the shame is the antidote being because it's a relational feeling, it needs to be healed in relationship with others. So if I'm trying to heal it, but someone's judging me, like that's just going to reinforce the shame. So it really needs to be in connection with someone who is compassionate and non-judgmental. It can provide empathy, and then with the perfectionism and with shame, it's the self-compassion of accepting who we are, where we're at.
Yeah, 100%. I agree totally.
Well, thanks. And if you didn't, I'm always open to growing and being wrong because developing self-compassion has allowed me to take that feedback in a different way than my perfectionistic self would have in the past.
There are plenty of times that I'm wrong. Again, what was it? I spent like, the years I've become a psychiatrist, which is a small sliver of medicine. And there's so much within that sliver that I don't know, right? Psychiatry has a lot to learn and grow and evolve. So I think humility is a must, where it's like, again, we all have room for growth. Medicine is evolving. And I think to think that we know it all is a very dangerous place to be. I don't think it's good for our patients. So there's plenty that I don't know. There's plenty of room for growth for me as well. And I think that kind of a mentality of a growth mindset with humility, I think it allows us to reach our fullest potential, whatever that looks like for every single one of us. So yeah, there's plenty that I don't know. There's plenty of times that I'm wrong as well.
I love how you just said that so naturally. I think if people can hear it like that, like, right? Beginner's mind.
Yeah, well, I think we hurt our fellow colleagues by like presenting these facades.
Hmm.
I work with again, half my practice is doctors, and I'll see like a lot of residents, and they come in and they have these expectations like they're supposed to know it all. Like interns now, it's like, dude, there's a reason your residency is like 4 years. Like I've been in attending for a decade, and there's so much that I don't know.
Hmm.
There's stuff as I've been in attending for a decade. There's stuff that I don't know, and I still have to learn because psychiatry is evolving. So how can you know it all? Like having been an intern for a resident for 8 months, that's
Hmm.
just an unrealistic expectation. So I think it's important for us to have that humility. And humility doesn't mean that I'm worse than anyone. Humility means that um, I have an accurate assessment of my strengths and weaknesses, and I'm working hard to overcome weaknesses that we all have. And that it protects us from our biases that we all have, and it makes us less likely to make mistakes, falling to the trap of overconfidence, right? So we all have stuff to learn. be careful of a doctor who thinks they know it all.
Mhm.
I think that's a dangerous doctor, quite frankly, because our fields are always evolving. There's so much information in medicine, right? So I think if we can all have more of a humble approach and a more authentic approach, I think we can really change the culture of medicine. And again, there are systemic issues that are affecting the culture of medicine and are contributing to burnout and to moral injury. That is true. But the question that I ask people is, how am I contributing to this reality? And are there things that I'm doing that's making this reality harder than it is? And I think if we can honestly answer that question, I think we can all identify areas in our own personal lives to make changes to help us better navigate the systemic challenges and the daily challenges of practicing medicine.
Your message is such an important one, and I felt it like at the deep inner child level of like
Yeah.
that message I wish I heard when I was a resident, and I'm so glad to receive it now. It's such an important message to pass on. I hope it reaches people of all levels of training. I do think if people could really adopt that philosophy, I remember some of the times I still remember how I felt when I got things wrong. Actually, my last video was about confidence and how I now realize it comes from this beginner's mind and the humility that you said, not this know it all. Like that's such an insecure persona we often
It
were
is.
taught to put on. And you can tell it's fake and it's annoying to be around. It's like annoying to embody for myself. I'm like, no, I don't want to. I just want to be here and like admit that I don't know. And that's fine. Like, I don't know, I'm learning, right?
Oh, I'm still learning. I've done this for a decade as an attending, and I'm still learning. And the day that I think that I know it all, that's the day that's I need to assess what I'm doing with my career.
Mhm.
You know, that's because again, perfectionism means I have nowhere else to go. I have nothing else to learn. That is that's a dangerous mindset that I think doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve our colleagues, and it doesn't serve our patients. So I think we all have things to learn and grow and continue on our journeys.
And I noticed too, and I'm curious what the audience notices about how adopting that feels like when, I'm always you talk a lot about anxiety and high achievers, and I'm always just uptight and like in threat mode that I'm going to do something wrong, and giving yourself permission to lean in and to know you'll get things wrong. You're learning. I just felt it just was so kind and nurturing, and I could feel my shoulders drop and
Yeah,
just like my heart was open, and I don't feel like it's a threat. It felt so like I can come into your space and learn alongside you and not feel like you're going to call me stupid or you're going to humiliate me in front of other people. And that was a big part of, I mentioned to you, I was in surgery and I was in the military and I was in the household that I came in. I was always in a place where I feel like I was going to be humiliated. Like that was a learned experience based off of the realities I faced. And so it means a lot to me when I can come into a space where people have created that culture that is a compassionate learning space that pushes people but allows them to be wrong and to experiment. And like you said, it actually improves safety because people aren't overconfident and thinking that they know or not asking questions that they need in order to do the best work for patients because they're afraid of looking a certain way.
yeah. I think people have a hard time of letting go of perfectionism. Again, one reason is because of the connotations that it has, to be hardworking, conscientious, detail oriented. And it's also a guard, so it's a protective mechanism. But another reason is because we're afraid that if I'm not perfect, I am going to be complacent. If I'm not perfect, I am going to fail. If I'm not perfect, I'm going to be rejected. I'm not going to be a good doctor, right? So again, perfectionists think all or nothing. I'm either perfect or a failure. But in reality, we can do really, really, really good work. We can work really hard. We can be excellent, outstanding, and still have room for growth. And I think that's a healthier approach. Again, some of these traits, they're not reinforced in medicine because I think they also have negative connotations. Um, to be imperfect, again, it has a negative connotation, I think, for a lot of people, right? To let go of perfectionism has that connotation of being complacent. To be humble, it has a connotation of being inadequate, of being inferior. But that's not what it means. And I think if we can challenge these misconceptions, about these different traits, I think we can incorporate them in medicine and allow for medicine to be a little more of a well-rounded culture.
Mhm. I think so much of it, like the hyper individually, like the hyper focus on our individual successes is really driving us away, not only from the healing capacity of what it means to connect together and be on the same team, but also it abandons the deeper connection that we crave as humans.
I agree
And
totally. Yeah.
I really loved your TEDx talk, which is also challenging the narrative on success and happiness. Can you share a little bit more about that talk and why it was important for you to give it?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember that. It's been a couple of years. So yeah, I believe it was about this illusion that success equals happiness, right? And that was the illusion that governed my life for the longest time. The arrival fallacy that I will be happy when I, become a doctor, when I get married, when I have kids, when I have X amount of money in the bank. All these illusions that we all say. When I finally have enough money to retire from medicine, when I'm retired, we all idealize goals, one of which is achievement. Then we get there and we are disappointed because it's not always sunny with clear blue skies when we make it to the top of our mountain. Some of the days will be overcast, with strong winds and heavy rain. So that's the thing that happens. We idealize success and we forget that it comes with its own share of challenges, an increase in responsibility, and being under greater scrutiny, right? So the talk that I gave was about challenging some of these misconceptions about success and not to prioritize success over other values that I would argue are probably more important than success, such as
Mhm.
being kind, being empathetic, having integrity, and treating one another with compassion.
Mhm. I love those. And that tied into what I realized when I was on my what I thought was going to be my deathbed. It was kind of the realization that I was prioritizing all these societal values that at the end of it, that deep pain of loneliness and seeing how I pushed everybody away and I denied myself social engagement because it detracted from my capacity to study and excel in school because I had a hard time balancing it all. So it is, it's interesting. And I'm going to share your talk down below. I think it's a really essential talk
Thank
for
you.
people to listen to. And I know I could talk to you all day, so I will withhold a whole lot of more questions for now, but I would love to hear a little bit more about your book and what people can expect.
Oh, you're too kind. So I've had the privilege of serving hundreds of physicians, working with them, and I've learned a lot from their stories. And I enjoy writing. It's therapeutic for me. It's healing for me, but also it allows me to reflect on the thoughts that we talk about. Right. So um, I'm working. I worked with an academic publisher, and we decided to write a self help book. And we titled it "Physician Burnout: How to Rise Above a Broken Healthcare System," because the system is broken, and the system's. I'm not sure how much it's going to change, but the question is, how do we navigate this broken system to the best of our ability, right? And I believe that there are many things that we can do to help us change the culture, which is one step in the right direction as far as helping us be better equipped for the challenges of medicine in 2025.
Well, I can't wait to read it. Do you have an idea of when it might come out? Or is that still
End of the
TBD?
month.
End
End
of
of
the
the
month?
month,
Oh my
March 31st,
goodness.
2025, the publisher told me.
Wow. Oh my
So
goodness.
yeah, yeah. So I hope it's a book that's helpful to people, because again, the majority of physicians battle burnout. The majority of physicians battle mental health difficulties, and I hope that the book has thoughts that people can identify with, and it can help them be better equipped to navigate the challenges of medicine, and also their daily lives too, because life has challenges and medicine has challenges.
Yeah, and I love that you're creating the book that we know the problem, but also the solutions, right? What can help here? So when I have that link, I will update the description to
Uh,
have a link to your book down below. And I know I follow you. You write in a lot of different spaces. What's the best way to people to find your other writings?
so I write for Psychology Today. So I do have a website, dimitriostsatiris.com. I can give you that link. It's my first name and last name.com, where I post articles that I publish in Psychology Today. Um, I'm also pretty active on X and on I always want to say Twitter and on Instagram, where I share thoughts for the day and different writings.
Well, good. Well, I do know all those links because I follow you. So
The
I'll put
following is
those.
mutual. I
Yeah.
follow you too. I enjoy your thoughts as well. It's great that we've met on social media. I know that there's negatives of social media and the internet, but there's also positives. One of which is the opportunity to meet like-minded people and try to do work that ultimately benefits our profession.
Well, thank you. And you gave so many great lessons. I'm wondering, is there any last takeaways you want to share with the audience?
Last takeaway is give yourself permission to rest. Give yourself permission to be kind to yourself. Give yourself permission to let go of these unrealistic, unattainable, and unsustainable expectations that are only hurting you and those around you. And I think we can be we can be just as productive without carrying that heavy shield, the shield of perfectionism.
Beautiful. I know you've had a long clinic day, so that permission to rest sounds
Thank you. Thank you.
ideal for right
I'm starting
now.
to slow down, Jillian. Sorry, I'm starting to slow down there a little bit. The word
No, you're
finding is getting
not.
harder and harder.
You're being your authentic self, and I love every
Amen.
aspect. So, but I
Thank you.
do think it's important to honor that need to rest. And again, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're too kind. Thank you, Jillian.
Yeah. And for the audience, please share your questions, your reflections, your takeaways in the comments down below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, thanks for being here.